Hey everybody, I am Sarah, and welcome back to Overkill Unearthed, where we talk about classic metal bands and their albums and do a deep dive into the records. Let's jump in. Before we, do the reviews and the stuff, make sure you hit subscribe, throw some money at us on Patreon. Today we are reviewing a very important progressive, sludgy noise punk album. Evidently, when this album was released, the band began touring it, and the crowds would sometimes get so hostile that they would literally heat up quarters with their lighters, throw them at the band along with glass bottles. And quite frankly, I can't think of a better album to inspire so much malevolence other than this one, because it quite frankly makes me feel uncomfortable. That's right, we are reviewing Through Silver and Blood by the almighty American band Neurosis. It was released on April 2nd, 1996 by Relapse Records. Let's provide some insight, some context, that important stuff about Neurosis for you, shall we? So with these reviews, we were told to start with our personal memories of the band, and I've got two with Neurosis. The first one was, after high school, I started working at an HMV, and a particularly pretentious fellow came into the store one day, and at the point, I had started really liking ISIS, and he made some snotty comment like, oh, why would you listen to ISIS when you could just listen to Neurosis? Well, dude, you're an asshole, but thanks, because now I love Neurosis. My other memory of them is seeing them in 2007 at Hellfest in France, and it was my favorite concert of all time. And Steve Von Till, who we'll actually chat with later in this review, ended up howling, throwing his head back, bashing his face directly into a microphone, and then spent the rest of the set pouring blood down his face while projections of wolves ran across the behind them on stage. And quite frankly, it was the best fucking concert I've ever seen in my entire life, so thank you, Neurosis. Now for some actual information about the band. Neurosis formed in 1985 in Oakland, California, and when they first started out, they were more of a punk band that was inspired by the likes of Amoebics, Rudimentary Peni, and Discharge. After, a couple of albums, they began mutating into this incredibly venomous beast. They were experimenting with noise and electronics, and they were really just pushing the limits of repetition to gargantuan heights. Grappling with personal demons, band leaders Scott Kelly and Steve Von Till basically translated that into this incredibly dense, feral, and wounded style that just communicates the dark and light duality of consciousness. Although their really early albums, such as Pain of Mind, are kind of somewhat forgotten, at least in comparison to the later, more classic albums, it was the staggering 1-2 punch of 1993's Enemy of the Sun, which is like a fucking masterpiece. I love it. And then their 1996 debut on Relapse Records, Through Silver and Blood, those albums are what propelled the band onto the international stage. But, what exactly did they achieve, in particular on Through Silver and Blood, that they hadn't done previously? Let's talk about it. All right, we're gonna kick off this review with more contextualizing. How fun for you. Like Enemy of the Sun, Through Silver and Blood was captured at Engineer with Billy Anderson, and his resume includes releases by bands like Acid King, I Hate God, Buzz Oven, and Sleep. Furthermore, Neurosis went into the studio after the tour cycle for Enemy of the Sun. Evidently, the tour cycle of Enemy of the Sun, the way that they finished off each concert was by using this punishing drum loop that would go until the room was cleared. So just completely punishing the audience with this sonic battering. So you can imagine how that kind of precedent materialized on Through Silver and Blood. It's, it's starting off with the title track, and the intro and riffs and sounds are unsettling, but they're also constantly repeating over and over and over. And I really wanted to know why it was that the band went this way, so I talked to Steve Von Till, who is one of the guitarists and the singers of the band, and this is what he said.
The use of repetition we had kind of discovered through the previous album's touring cycle was leading us into really altered states of consciousness. I mean, we were able to play ourselves into oblivion. Part of it was, the influence of known shamanic techniques of using repetition and drumming or chanting to enter a different state of consciousness. And so why couldn't we do the same thing with a heavy riff?
Furthering the emotional impact of this use of repetition was the layering and noise elements that the band had contributed by their newest member, Noah Landis, who was the keyboardist, and he had also worked on the Neurosis adjacent project, Tribes of Neurons, who released their debut called Silver Blood Transmission prior to Through Silver and Blood. Now, this is important because these projects are adjacent to each other, but because Tribes of Neurot used noise in a way more dominant fashion, that allowed more of the rock to dominate Neurosis. On Through Silver and Blood, the noise never really fully overtakes the noise elements, and instead those two things are very skillfully integrated, albeit there are two short, exclusively noise tracks with the songs Rehumanize and Become the Ocean. Now, to return to the point, there is, the layering, the noise, these massive fucking gargantuan riffs, and that repetition, and all of them really materialize on the best track of the album, which is Locust Star, where you just hear these massive riffs that are interlaced with screeching noise, and then all these progressions, and they all end up returning into the chorus, and that's like screamed, it's "Star, rain down on me." And there's vocals delivered by 3 separate members of the band. It's in this roaring style that is kind of like gruff shouting, but never shrieking or falsetto. It's just very much like a gruff shouted spoken word, very punk approach to vocals. So when you package all that together, and then you see the actual presentation of the album, which was also created by the band, and the way that they did it was by, you guessed it, layering a bunch of images, scanning, Xeroxing, overlapping, interlacing, and that resulted in a very iconic cover image. And now you have this masterpiece that I would say very strongly, if not single-handedly, kicked off the entire post-metal genre, which now includes releases by bands, like Isis, like Cult of Luna, by bands like Rosetta. There's numerous others that clearly take direct influence from Neurosis specifically.
In some ways, that was kind of the pinnacle of our exploration of creating a suffocating density, adding layer upon layer of different noises and sounds. Actually, I remember a biker guy who lived on my street who wasn't really into modern music. I gave him a copy, and he came back a few days later and goes, "Man, that was like a railroad through hell." Yeah, the artwork, the visuals, the volume, the repetition, the layers, the density, the physicality, all of it came into play. And that's, I think we kind of maxed it out there. And then we learned from that in the future that we actually wanted things to breathe more and to allow things to have space and to allow things to have breath. But that was not our intent with Through Silver and Blood. That was, don't let them up for air.
And now we're going to go into the worst parts. Well, this is our classic albums that we're kind of inducting into our own personal Hall of Fame. So I don't really have a worst parts, but if you're a person who does not like repetitious music, if you're not down with bands like industrial, like with Swans, with that kind of stuff, you're probably not going to dig this. And honestly, I think that one's on you, because if you invest in it, the payoff is massive. I can't think of a band that is more aptly named than Neurosis. On Through Silver and Blood, the band hits their apex. They're skillfully integrating this extremely ominous and suffocating sound that honestly is, if you're in the wrong mood, this is physically uncomfortable to listen to. For all those reasons, this album is getting 5 skulls out of 5 here on Overkill Unearthed. And before you go, make sure you read all those articles that I've written about this band and interviews I've done with this band. They're all linked in the video description. Thanks. Bye.